What's going on? Welcome to this week's edition of 5 Minutes of Management. I'm Frank Kalman here with Rick Bell. Rick, what do we got going on this
All right,
week?
so we have Optimus Awards are going to air in a special edition of 5 Minutes of Management on November 20th. So basically 2 weeks away.
That's right.
We will reveal the 10 Optimus Awards winners as well as the winner in General Excellence. And an amazing lineup, Frank. I know who they are. I know the companies, and we have spoken to some of them already, and just an impressive array.
And if I'm not mistaken, you guys will be filming that announcement at Workforce Focus,
yes, we
which
will.
is, believe it or not, happening November 9th. By the time this video airs, it will probably have happened already, but needless to say, if you were there, it was awesome.
I'm coming to Boston on Monday, so you get ready. Well, Anyway, so Frank, guess what I got in my email box
What's
today?
that?
I got my invitation to our annual holiday party, the HCM holiday party. So holiday parties, of course, are a big part of what organizations do, and I mean, for a while there, the companies weren't doing it during the recession, but I think holiday parties are back, and of course, there's always, you just want to make sure and be careful and do the right thing at the holiday party. So
don't overserve yourself.
Fortunately, ours is from noon to 2, so there's always the after party. Anyway.
Well, anyways, we got a lot of good news this week. Starting off, we have an interesting report from the Wall Street Journal. You know, Rick, while the economy has really expanded and grown since the recession, a lot of the criticism has been it's been sort of like a wageless economy in terms of we're not seeing the wage growth that you might see during an expansion. But according to the Wall Street Journal, a lot of those gains in compensation are coming in benefits instead. So companies are offering more signing bonuses, they're offering more PTO options, they're offering more flexible work, you name it, a lot of voluntary benefits. And employees are kind of seeing this as sort of a double-edged sword. On the one hand, you've got, you're not getting as much in wages, but as a plus, these kind of benefits are tax-free, so you're kind of getting a gain on your tax bill. So
yeah.
Interesting development in the economy.
Well, yeah, and it's hard to dispute that cash is king, and it's always nice to have that jingle in your pocket. But it's also nice to be able to have extra money that's going toward your benefits or that bonus at the end of the year or voluntary benefits like, I don't know, dog walking service or something.
Yeah.
It's just nice to have those sorts of things. And organizations that are doing that, I think, are really wise because, yeah, I mean, raises are basically still flat. They're still 2, 3, maybe 4%, and that's on the high end. So it's just like, what else can organizations do to compensate their people? Well, they're finding creative ways to do it.
Well, what's also interesting about it is most of the job growth since the recession has come in knowledge work, professional services, business, doctors, and those are professions where compensation typically makes up a smaller piece of the larger total comp pie. Professions, like retail, service, waiters, things like that. The job growth in those categories, according to the journal, hasn't grown as much, and those are jobs where wages and salaries typically make up about 76% of total compensation. So that's also something to consider.
Yeah.
What else we got?
Well, Frank, a little bit, some actual hard news this time.
Oh.
So I know, darn. No, this is some pretty serious stuff. So opioids in the workplace and being prescribed in workers' comp cases, it's really starting to become part of the mainstream media and really starting to take notice. And employers should take notice of this because a doctor in California was convicted of murder for overprescribing opioids, Valium and drugs like that. And so it wasn't necessarily in a workers' comp case, but I think what we're seeing now is that this is really becoming an issue, opioids as ways to get better versus opioids because of their addictive qualities. And I think you're really starting to see that. And so there's even this debate now with marijuana versus opioids and which is actually better for workers. So that debate is going to continue, and but I think this case here really is something of a landmark. First time in the nation that a doctor has been convicted of murder for overprescribing opioid medicines.
Well, that's something to keep a lookout. Well, we got an interesting story to cap us off. The Economist last week reported about this idea of name-blind resumes. So, Rick, imagine you applied for a job and you sent in your application, your resume, but the person filing through that resume wasn't able to see your name. Mm-hmm. According to The Economist, there are some companies in Britain, including HSBC and Deloitte, they're actually trying out name-blind resumes, and the effort is to thwart discrimination based on sex or ethnicity. So kind of an interesting tactic there. The Economist, for its part, doesn't seem too convinced that it's going to work. I mean, they do admit that it might be a small step towards, helping thwart gender or sexual discrimination in job applications, but I'm not convinced that this is going to work.
And that tends to be one of the arguments still that you hear regarding video interviewing, because in video resumes, because there's that potential for bias that and not on purpose, but it's just like sometimes you just see that it's this person or that person, and it may creep in. So I think there's legitimacy for doing that, and I think it's a great experiment, and hopefully it proves that there is opportunities to do something like that.
Yeah, it will be interesting to see what the results of those companies' experiment is. So, Rick, that's all I've got. Anything else from you?
Nope. Optimus. And
that's all we've got for this week's edition of 5 Minutes of Management. For Rick Bell, I'm Frank Kalman. We'll see you guys next week.